Hello, this is Joseph and Train, and welcome to a new episode of Home of Sound. Home of Sound is the virtual and global home for any music lover to connect, learn, and engage with the electronic music community. We started the platform with this very podcast series to discover and share insights into the life, work, and tools of producers, DJs, VJs, promoters, label owners, playlist curators, and other creators. Since the global pandemic hit, we launched a series of online masterclasses with creators such as Ansom, Scarameria, Francois X, Swarm Intelligence, Freddie K, Face Fatal, Vijay Martinovna, Malika Maria, Lag, VSK, Romek, Manny D, Arjun Bagale, and many, many more. If you're interested in the masterclasses, you can access any of them, also in bundles, on demand at www.homeofsound.co.uk. To say hi, connect with us, suggest new guests, leave feedback, and see what else we're up to, you can find us on Instagram at home_of_sound. And for all the other links, visit linktr.ee/home_of_sound. And now, let's start with today's guest. Enjoy. Chloe, nice to meet you, and thanks so much for being with us tonight.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Very cool to read about you, know your story. I told you I was a bit frightened by interviewing you because I know you are also a journalist.
You don't have to be frightened.
Yeah. I'll do my best. So for someone who hasn't met you yet and meets you at a house party and they ask you, "Hey, Chloe Lula, who are you? What do you do in life?" How would you answer?
I would say that I am a journalist and a musician. I usually keep it pretty vague because there are a lot of things that I'm interested in.
Yeah, that sounds good. And so let's start with your journey. You were born in US and eventually came to Berlin a couple of times, first visiting, and then eventually you moved here. What do you remember about your youth that still gives you goosebumps? I'm talking about the US part.
Okay. Well, if you mean goosebumps in in a good way, I mean, what I still remember really clearly from growing up in the Bay Area was, this was like pre-tech bubble. So there were like a lot fewer regulations. There was like a lot of really cool shit going on then. And when I was in high school, so like around the time I was 16 or so, my friends and I would throw these big raves in Golden Gate Park, which is like this big park, kind of like Central Park. And we got this really big generator and we would just set a point in Google Maps and invite like a couple hundred people to come. And so we'd set up a table and like a lamp and we weren't even using CDJs then. It was like these little tractor controllers. And so like a couple hundred people would come and we would just party there for like a couple of hours or even longer until the cops came. Because it was just like so far away from the roads that people couldn't hear it. So that was like one very cool thing about living in the Bay Area around that time. I don't know if you could get away with doing that now. But I have like fond memories of doing stuff like that then.
Well, that's interesting, and I want to stop and I want to actually ask more questions about your how you started getting involved into parties. But even before that, it's interesting you said before the tech bubble. So we're talking about 2000, a bit earlier even than that, right? Or you're talking about the second bubble?
I guess the second bubble. So I guess this was probably around like 2006, 2007. Is that right?
Yeah. So I guess there was maybe in terms of timeline, there was like before Facebook and after Facebook. Facebook is like 2007 because I have friends who live in Los Angeles, San Francisco, and they tell me that it's like before and after Facebook. When Facebook arrived there, they started like pumping the market with like a lot of high-paid jobs, and it changed the city completely.
Yeah, it totally changed the city. Yeah, it's somewhere I honestly couldn't live now, I don't think. But I really miss it how it was.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. Well, are you still in touch with friends there?
I don't have that many friends there anymore. Maybe like 2 or 3, but it's because they work in the tech industry. Most of my friends moved to LA or to New York.
Yeah, they got acquired or sucked into the tech industry.
yeah, exactly.
Interesting. So let's start talking about like your techno or like music passion. You mentioned you started with this let's call them like underground techno parties. And do you feel like what attracted you to start throwing party? Was it something that you saw, friends you had, or was something that came out of maybe inside of yourself?
I mean, I first started getting involved in the music scene. I mean, so it started by just like going out to parties when I was in high school, um, and like doing like the raves in the, in the park. um, but then I got really, really involved when I joined my college radio station, and that was kind of the first time I felt like I was part of a community, and I was like actually involved in like curating music, and that's when I started throwing parties. Um, and I think I was like really attracted to this idea that there was a way to be involved in participating in the music scene that wasn't institutional. And so that was, when we started throwing parties in like abandoned apartment buildings, which again is probably not something you could really do now. Um, but yeah, the underground and like the whole ethos of the DIY community was like really, really attractive to me at that point.
Yeah. And you feel like it seems that it is something that like speaks to you, like resonates with who you are. Like, have you figured out if there is a like a particular side of throwing a party in an abandoned building that you like? Is it the kind of the goosebumps of doing something that is not quite in the box, or something else?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big part of it for me. And I think that other people who are involved in the underground music scene can probably relate to this a little bit. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
I really like moving in spaces that aren't, connected to like commercial success or like institutions or like mainstream values or like aesthetic values. And I feel like a lot of my friendships are actually based around this idea, like people who are like driven by finding spaces like this or like creating music that like falls into these worlds. And like I really enjoy spending time in bigger clubs and like going to different like bigger events, but I am constantly drawn back to like these more unusual spaces that are kind of like on the peripheries.
And do you feel that like US in that respect is different from what we see here in Europe? Like for example, Berlin is it's a club city and there is tons of clubs. Probably there's not even need for underground abandoned spaces to exist much because people can go to a club and stay there for 3 days. Do you see that that is different in US?
Yeah, I mean there's like you have these big clubs here, like you said, that don't really exist in the US. And, I think like I love the fact that there are more like DIY parties in the US and like in New York especially. But I think like the flip side of that is that you don't have the funding for the arts in the US that you have here, which is why I moved to Berlin. So you can have these like cool kind of um, like one-off parties or, parties that last for like, a couple of years, but then they end up kind of dying out because you aren't able to get the same kinds of like financial opportunities that you would have here to like keep something going. Um, so I think that is
Yeah.
something that I wish would change in the US.
Yeah. And if you spend time on thinking why this is the reason, like, have you thought about, is it cultural because people don't care, or maybe they don't believe in electronic music, or there's something else involved in why in US it's much harder to get funding?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like a cultural thing. I think, America's priorities are a little bit different. I think a lot of money goes into like defense and things that aren't related to the arts. Like I know that in public schools especially, like the arts programs are like very critically underfunded. Um, and I think there's just not as much of an appreciation for it, really, sadly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very sad because I mean I think it's something that arts, it's something that everyone in the world should be appreciated and respected.
Yeah,
Like it's
definitely.
yeah. But let's talk about you and your kind of career, or like your development in work, the work you do. So you are a journalist on one side and DJ, composer, producer on the other side. I have so many questions that I want to ask you about both, but let's start with the music side.
Okay.
You launched your own label called Detour. I think it was 2012, if I'm not mistaken.
Mhm.
You manage a couple of labels, including Holodeck Records, Aufnahme, Wiedergabe. From a label manager perspective, like what are the key things for someone to manage a label successfully, including helping artists, selecting artists you want to work with, and helping them?
Um, I think, well, I think from an A&R perspective, what makes someone good at running a label um, is if they have like a very well conceptualized and cohesive musical and visual aesthetic that kind of like sticks to a vision, but it also challenges people's expectations. So I think that's a really hard balance to strike, but there's some people who do it exceptionally well. Um, I think like Elena Colombi has always been like an amazing example of this. I really love her. And I think, I mean, she's also like a visual designer. So it helps that she has like the, the visual aspect as well as the musical aspect. Um, but I think also from an administrative standpoint, it's important to be like super organized and good at communicating. Because I've been on both sides of the industry at this point, like managing labels, but also like a musician. And there's nothing that bothers me more than waiting on answers from people or like not being clear about what's going on or being confused or left hanging. So those are definitely my big points.
Yeah, so essentially having clear artistic direction on one side, paired up with a very good process, perhaps, so like managing things in the right way.
Yeah.
You mentioned Elena Colombi. I don't know much about her work. Is there anyone else that come in mind when you think about someone really good at managing their label?
I think Regis with Downwards. I mean, that was like super influential for me from like the beginning of when I got into electronic music, and Blackest Ever Black as well. When I think of those labels, I think of like a very, very distinct aesthetic and like you can imagine what the party was like, like the artwork, the sound. Like I think when you're able to like build I mean, I hate using the word brand, but like once you're able to build a brand like that, I think it's like you've been very successful as a label.
Yeah. And do you think these things happen like by chance, or there is someone who was like really thinking about, oh, maybe I need to be really good at, or maybe intentional in setting up my identity in your
I think it's
experience?
intentional. I think it's intentional. Like I think to like have, a vision come together that is that cohesive. I think it has to be like pretty methodical and like strategically planned. Even though it might not, like I don't think it would necessarily come across as being like that strategic, but my guess is that in most cases it is.
Perhaps intentional, but not necessarily planned, or like it's not
Yeah,
something that people,
intentional.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and I think Regis is certainly a name that comes up very often. And whenever you have this type of conversations, like it seems to be one of the people that nailed it in some ways.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I was also thinking when you mentioned the clear visual aesthetics, I thought about Silent Servant, who of course was working
Mm,
also with Regis very closely.
yeah. Yes.
One.
Yeah, he's been also a hero of mine for a long time.
Yeah, and he's great, and I think he is super intentional. We had the pleasure to host him in a class once, Almost Sound, but he's, for me, it really changed my perception of how you approach an artwork, because
Mhm.
and I remember he talking about connotations and what you use as a symbol into your artwork to express an idea.
Hmm. Yeah,
And that,
that's interesting.
yeah, exactly. So I think it's super important from a label perspective.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, in your experience with let's say Aufnahme, like what was your role there? Like how did you work together with the label, and yeah, tell us a bit more about the story.
Yeah, so I actually, when I moved to Berlin, like I moved with the intention of like being a label manager. Um, and so I just reached out to Phil Strobel cold. Like I sent him a cold email and said I wanted to work with him. And he said, okay. And so that's how we started working together. And I wasn't doing very much A&R stuff at that point. Like I was mostly doing like administrative stuff. So doing like all the digital distribution, and we also, Aufnahme has an internal booking agency, so I was doing a lot of booking, um, PR stuff, kind of like everything.
Yeah,
With like any small imprint, it's like
wearing all the hats, like
yeah.
possible hats.
Yeah. But yeah, I ended up leaving and pursuing journalism, like more full time, because I found, or I kind of stumbled across this job at Electronic Beats, and ended up just like really loving it. And so that's kind of what I've been doing for the last few years. Yeah.
Yeah, and you work now for Electronic Beats as a freelance journalist, or you are part of their main journalists?
So I was a deputy editor until 2019. And then I left to go to grad school, and I got my master's in journalism. And since I graduated, I've just been doing freelance work, but also because I've been interested in writing beyond just doing music journalism. So I'm writing for a few different publications.
Yeah, very interesting. And before we talk a lot about the journalist part of it, like let me ask you a few more questions about your music.
Okay.
In timeline, in terms of timeline, so 2012, you started your own label, then eventually you moved to Berlin around 2013, and 2016 is when you moved to Berlin, which is also when you started DJing, roughly.
Yes. Yep.
And was there a specific moment? So were you already here in Germany when you started DJing, or it was back in US and then here it picked up?
So when I started DJing in the US, when I had started this label called Detour, and at that point it wasn't really serious. Like we were playing a lot of like DIY parties, and yeah, I was like, I didn't even know how to use CDJs. So I like really more seriously started when I was here, and it was actually Phil Strobel who started booking me to play the Aufnahme and wiedergabe showcases, which is like how I really started. And yeah, I guess I answered your question.
Yeah, makes sense. And then after that, so you had this relationship with Philip. You started DJing. When you say it more seriously, I take like more with CDJs or vinyls, like not using a computer support, right? So that's how you started approaching DJing, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry, you broke up a little bit when you were
I don't know
in
what
your last comment.
I was saying. I was saying. So when you say you started DJing more seriously, means you started spending more time and you shifted to different tools. So you started using CDJs, right?
Yeah.
And eventually, I read, like when I was researching on your work, like you started also producing music and composing a bit later. How?
Yeah.
Yeah, was it a natural progression for you to go into production eventually, or?
Yeah. And the thing is, like, I never actually, I never saw myself as a producer, and I don't think it was necessarily like an aspiration that I had early on. But I think part of it's because I didn't really like believe that I could do it. And as soon as I started, I kind of prefer producing to DJing at this point. And like
Wow.
the more involved I get with production, like the more I just like really, really enjoy it. But yeah, it was a natural progression, but it didn't really start happening until like 2018, 19. Yeah.
It again, like, was there a specific process in your thinking that made you start thinking, okay, maybe I'm gonna start like producing and creating music?
Well, so I guess, so I've been a musician for like my whole life. I was a really serious classical musician actually for
Wow.
about 10 or 12 years. Um, and like I went to music school growing up, and like went to the conservatory on the weekends. So it's like always been like a part of my identity. And I think I got really serious about producing and not just playing. Yeah, it was because my ex was really into modular stuff. So we had like a bunch of modular gear at home, and that's really how I started. So he built me my own modular system, and I was like kind of just playing around with it for a while without having any like goal of like writing it into
Releasing.
an album or anything. And then as soon as I started getting better at the tools and like I kind of, learned how to like use Ableton well, that's kind of how I started. Yeah.
Got it. And
Yeah.
so that was 2018, 2019. And eventually, I know that a few weeks ago you released an EP on Aufnahme.
Yes.
What was the hardest part of like, working on a full EP?
The hardest part, well, so I wrote most of that when I did this music, like an artist residency at Akud in Berlin. And so I actually stopped working, like I stopped my full-time job for a month so that I could do this residency. And so I went into the studio every single day as if it was my full-time job. So I was spending like 10 or 12 hours in the studio at a time, which I'd never done before. Like I was used to just working for like maybe 2 or 3 hours at a time. And that was definitely the hardest part for me, because it was just like I poured so much into it, like emotionally and time wise. And I just remember feeling like so burnt out and like drained, and had a couple of like total breakdowns. Like when I was like trying, I'd been in the studio for hours and I was like trying to get a piece of hardware to work or something. But I also just like I accomplished so much in the course of those few weeks. So it's something that I would do again, but I definitely needed like a long break after that.
Yeah, and certainly, I mean, it's like almost like the artist natural work that has to come when you want to release anything. Like you need to push yourself. It's not that I don't know. I get the feeling that sometimes people think, oh, doing art is always the best thing one can do. It's super glamorous and cool because people get to play outside and play in front of people. But it does require a lot of hard work, and that includes also showing up in your studio every day, doing the work, even when you don't feel inspired, when you feel crap,
Yeah.
when things don't work, instruments,
Exactly.
you don't
Yeah,
get them to
yeah.
work. Like if you could go back to and meet Chloe at the time that she started, she said she set to write the EP. What would you say to her?
Oh gosh. um, I would tell her that it's gonna turn out like you're gonna be happy with this. So like
Do it.
just like yeah, don't lose faith. Because there were a lot of times where I really felt like I wanted to just quit. And I had a couple of friends who had to talk me into sticking with it. So
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think it is somewhere like it is everybody feels this at some point. Whenever they are writing music, at some point they feel the writer's block. And
yeah.
so for anyone who's listening now, guys, if you feel this way, it's normal. Everybody does. So don't get discouraged.
Yeah, it's part of my daily life.
So is there anything that like you use when you face, I don't know, let's say let's make an example. You need to write a piece that is commission work and you have a deadline. You need to write it by tomorrow. Then today you sit down and you're just like out of any inspiration whatsoever. You feel like completely stuck. How do you do that? How do you approach it?
Oh, God, it's like the absolute worst feeling. I mean, usually it's just like, even if I don't really know where to begin, it's like I just have to write down any idea that I have, even if it's like totally like it's out of order. It's something that I know is going to come at the end of the piece. And usually as soon as I start kind of just like sketching things out, like a sentence at a time, I can start like filling in the gaps a little bit. And it works the same way with music for me as well. Like as long as I have like some like
Input.
small idea.
Yeah, like an input.
Okay.
You
Yeah,
create.
yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then that's usually enough to like build a little bit of momentum. But sometimes that doesn't work and I actually need to just like step away from what I'm doing and like go for a walk for like an hour or just like go to bed. It kind of depends like how bad the writer's block is. So
I guess like this the component of like giving yourself the input, it's really helpful to then get back onto the feeling that. And then what I found as well is that a lot of people, including myself, for example, they find inspiration by actually doing music. So you almost like you create another input for your inspiration, so you get inspired by testing or trying something, even if it's very small. And you feel better, and then you start going again.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And in terms of your journalism, how much of that is dedicated to music? Because you mentioned now that you also want to expand in other topics.
I mean, it's still probably like 80% music. But I'm okay. Sorry, I just keep getting notifications about my microphone. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. Wonderful. But yeah, I would say like 20% now is like I'm moving more into kind of like, I don't want to say political journalism, but like I like writing a lot about like gender justice and like LGBTQ rights, and that's like, and like more like advocacy and like human rights issues. So that's kind of like where I'm shifting my attention more and more.
Yeah. And is that so? In terms of like the outlets, now you have, I suppose you have a lot of connections with electronic beats, but also music-related press. How do you carve your space or your connections into the next, let's call it the industry or topic? Do you leverage the same network, or where do you start?
Usually it's not the same network. I mean, it's really, really hard. Like it usually just involves like literally just cold emailing people. And it's how I got started in the music scene. Like when I moved to Berlin, I didn't know anybody. And it was like, emailing Philip Strobel and just being like, hi, like my name is Chloe. And just like hoping that people take you seriously and like want to talk to you. And usually they do. And so I've kind of found that just like by putting yourself out there, even if it's somebody who like you've had no previous connection with, or they're like kind of in a different industry, if usually if you reach out, people are like pretty receptive. So that's kind of how I've navigated my career.
Yeah, very interesting. Do you, in the first outreach, you offer something, meaning I would love to do this for you, or is more let's meet each other and see whether I can work for you?
It's usually just like me introducing myself and saying that like I followed their work and like I really admire what they're doing, and like if they'd be open to having a conversation with me, just to talk about their career. Like I usually don't try to like get anything from them, but more just to kind of like have a conversation and so they can see that you're
Interested.
yeah.
And it also is a reminder of like the importance of asking. Without asking, we are it's very hard to get anywhere or to meet people.
Yeah, definitely. You have to be super proactive, I think, especially in creative work.
Yeah, very interesting. And let's take another almost like a jump, but this could be like for both your music or journalism. What was one of the biggest mistakes that you've done in your career? And perhaps now you look back and you feel like, okay, this was like fun.
Okay, well, I wouldn't say this was fun at the time, but I can laugh at it now. When I when I first started DJing, this was before I moved to Berlin. So I was living in Pittsburgh, and I was like, I'd never played with CDJs before. And I just had this like little controller. It wasn't even like, it was like an off-brand controller. It was called like Mix Sage or something like that. And the club Hot Mass had just opened, and they were throwing a residence night for people who had like kind of been involved with getting it off the ground. And they asked me if I would play. And at that point, I had only ever played like in people's basements. And so I brought my little controller with me, just kind of like assuming that that's what everyone did. It was, I don't know. And I had no understanding of like what the industry standard was for like
Yeah.
for DJ gear. So I like brought this little controller. They didn't have like the right like cables to set it up, obviously. And I had prepared so much for the set. Like I had spent weeks picking out tracks, and like my controller didn't work. So I was like playing music and like train wrecking every single transition, and it was so
Wow.
humiliating. And like, you know, some friends were still really nice about it, and they were like, "Oh, we really liked your selections." But I was like so mortified. And like some people actually left like pretty nasty comments on the Facebook event page. It was definitely like a learning experience for me, because it was really like that point when I realized that I needed to learn how to use like proper equipment, and like to teach myself like, you know, how to be able to like show up at a club and like know what to do. But yeah, it was a difficult experience to go through.
Oh, indeed. I mean, like it's hard, especially if it's like your first official gig and and you feel you haven't delivered. There is bad comments. I can imagine it must have been like super hard at that time. But
Yeah, yeah. But I moved on, so it's okay.
yeah, it's exactly. I mean, these things always will always happen. Like we are humans, we fuck up all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and and there was another thing that I read, I think in a previous interview you did, which was I'm gonna paraphrase a bit, but it was about patience and learning how to wait for things, because especially big important things take time to realize. Um, I'm very impatient, and I think a lot of people are as well, like in terms of like their goal and objectives. Is there anything that works for you when it comes down to patience, to calm yourself and be, okay, this is gonna take time. Let's go with it.
Well, I'm also really impatient, but and sometimes it honestly feels like I'm just working and working and working and like
Mhm.
not seeing the output, and it can be really frustrating, and it can feel like you're just like banging your head against a wall. But then it's like those moments where you do see the output of your work, and it's just like so gratifying. And I think it's just like I have to remind myself that like those are the moments that I'm working towards. Um, and I think like in terms of dealing with like patience, I mean, what's worked for me at least is like, you know, we were talking about tools earlier, and like, you know,
Yeah.
what tools I use in the studio and whatever. And I think I've learned actually to just like scale back, because I think that I get really overambitious. I want to do so much stuff. Like I want to know how to like use a bunch of different kinds of hardware, or like make this like crazy huge live set. And um, I've learned that like I think the best way to be like really effective at what I'm doing is like to just focus on like one small thing at a time. Um, so like I mentioned, like I really scaled back my production process, to like really just using like software and a MIDI keyboard, and then like kind of slowly adding like maybe one or two desktop synths, and then like maybe a couple of effects pedals, and just getting like really really good at this like the tools that I have. Um, and then, you know, I feel like I'm making progress, and like I'm accomplishing what I want to accomplish. And I think that kind of like helps you overcome this feeling like you're like drowning or overwhelmed, or like not getting where you want to go.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So it seems like you try to, in a way, like remind yourself that there is a longer term goal waiting for you on the other side.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely like really challenging sometimes, but yes, I have learned now that there is usually another side.
Yeah, hopefully, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And especially like when it's a creative work, for example, music or writing, if you write novels, or I think it's very unrealistic to expect that things will happen very quick. So it's not like
Yeah.
and it's very different from perhaps jobs where you go and you get a paycheck almost immediately for the work you've done, where you see the result almost immediately. Like you work and then someone say scores you, ranks you. It's relatively structured, and then they give you, hey, here's your
Yeah.
whatever price.
Yeah, totally, totally. Yeah, it's like the opposite of that. Yeah, especially if, I feel like I'm pretty slow to work on music. I also think I'm kind of a slow writer.
Mhm.
So it's hard to like not necessarily get like validation all the time. Like you kind of have to be your own like best cheerleader, Yeah, it's
Judge
hard.
or yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, very interesting. And in terms of like your writing work, like when you have, for example, if you're pitching to a new um, newspaper or like a publication, are you approaching them with a portfolio and saying this is like the type of stuff that I normally write about, or you propose a topic that you want to write and then you decide together?
I usually like I will spend a lot of time researching ideas that I want to write about. So when I'm pitching to a publication, I usually am like, I've already done a bunch of reporting. Like I've already talked to the main characters I'm going to talk to. I already know exactly what the piece is going to look like. Um, and like I'll show them like similar pieces that I've written because like especially these bigger publications, like they don't know who I am.
Right.
They have a million people writing to them every day. It's like they want to know that you are going to be able to like deliver on the piece that you want to write. So I've had to get a lot of rejections, but I also think at this point I've gotten like pretty good at writing pitches and like knowing how much work I have to put into it ahead of time. Um, and if anyone has questions about journalism, I'm happy to like talk to them about it. So
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
it's yeah. Thank you. I think I'm sure there's gonna be a lot of people who have questions.
yeah,
Uh,
it's a tough industry. It's like brutal, but I love
it
it.
is. It
So
is. A,
yeah,
yeah, exactly. And I know nothing about journalism really, but I'm, even I've seen even in the music industry, journalism it's a very tough model as well in terms of sustainability. I'm talking about financial sustainability because
yeah,
everybody expects that the journalist works for free, at least from the audience side.
yeah,
So and everybody wants their attention. Write about me, write about my release, write about my label,
yeah,
and and I don't know. I've seen the model of advertising where the publication says, okay, we do everything for free, and then we get external advertisers to advertise to our audience, and then people complain because whatever the publication is full of ads or there are ads on the side of the website. And then there is the model which goes in the subscription, and people are like, oh, why should I pay you to read your articles? Or there is
yeah,
the model for like per review, like you whatever you pay a donation or a set price to be reviewed or to be considered, and people are like, oh fuck, this is too much. Like it shouldn't be about that. Like where do you see it in this spectrum? Like how do you see journalism in music being sustainable?
oh God, I mean, I don't know, and it's like it's something I struggle with because like I'm involved in both of these industries that pay like nothing. So I feel like I'm just working all the time to make ends meet. Um, I don't know. And it's like it's a conversation I have with a lot of my friends who are musicians and like
Mhm.
complain about doing a lot of work for free. And I think that there are models like Patreon has been like kind of a good solution for some people who are involved in creative industries. I mean, with journalism, you know, I don't know. I don't think that anybody should be paying to have their work reviewed. Um, but I think the issue that is like beginning to present itself is in order to be a journalist, um, like you have to come from the background where you're like privileged enough to be able to like possibly work for a few years without getting like steady income. And I think this creates like it creates an environment where the people who are doing the reporting, who are reporting on these issues, are like the people who are like the most privileged, and they're not necessarily the people whose voices should always be like represented in the media. Like so you kind of like lose this diversity. I feel like I'm kind of getting off off track, but
I think it's super important.
yeah, but I think it's like, it's definitely something that needs to be addressed. And I think this is kind of a recent development. Like, I think that journalists used to get paid more. And I don't know what the solution is, but
I guess the underlying driver could be that there is a saturation of the market, like with the music industry, where before you could make money out of record sales. Now it's close to impossible, or let's say it's reserved to certain genre or to the top 1% of the artists in that genre. Because there's so much music, like we're talking about like tens of thousands of tracks released every day across the year, plus the back catalog that already exists. It's almost like the odds are against you as a musician, like in terms of making money, infinitely against you.
I know.
Journalism is the same thing. Like in a way, they're like a journalist and or a writer or a musician. They're fighting for the attention of the audience, and there is another 10,000 or more, 100,000 people who fight for the same attention of the same people. Like it's very hard to create a model where it's sustainable for every single writer. I think that's the big underlying problem.
Yeah, it's really hard. Sometimes I try not to think about it too much because then it becomes like
depressing,
too daunting. Yeah. But I really feel like if you think that you have something original to bring, to music or to writing, like you have a fresh perspective, it's like I think that it's important to like keep going.
Yeah, I fully agree. And as you said, probably there is whatever, let's say, investment period where you're gonna lose a lot.
Yeah.
You need to prepare yourself, unless you're lucky that you have resources that you can already invest from whatever source. But if not, you need to factor that there's going to be like a lag between the moment you start and the moment you start being sustainable.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And okay, we talked about patience, and there's another thing that you seem to be doing multiple jobs. You're also a radio selector. Who is a radio selector, for someone who doesn't know about that?
Well, I guess, I mean, I just meant that in like like a very general way. Like I'm a curator, I guess. But I guess I don't know. When I think of the word selector, I think of like someone who's like thinking about music with maybe like a more discerning ear than just a DJ. Like someone who's like really digging deep into like kind of niche or unknown corners of music to like curate something kind of unusual. So that, I mean, that's kind of been my approach to radio DJing, because it's where I play a lot of the music that I would not play on the dance floor, because I listen to so much that's not just like electro or techno or whatever.
Yeah, and in a sense, because it's more like diverse, or how would you define it?
Yeah, definitely more diverse. I mean, the stuff that I play on the radio is like I used to do themed shows where I would go into like the history of like Soviet post-punk or something like that. And that the themes have kind of fallen apart, but I definitely take kind of like a historical approach, or like I'll like zoom out and look at a genre, like its roots, or like who the main players are and like the contemporary canon, and like almost study it ethnographically in a way that like I wouldn't as a dance floor DJ, where I'm just like picking tracks that like kind of fit together.
To be functional for dancing.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Got it. So in a way, there is a bit more like it's more thought of. It's a slower process of like selecting tracks that you want to present, compared to like playing a DJ set, which is like, okay, we're just gonna go straight into the movement, the dance.
Yeah, I mean, there's like a lot of thought that goes into a DJ set also, but it's like definitely a different way of choosing music.
Yeah. Do you prepare DJ sets long in advance, like, or you just go with the flow?
I do like to have an idea of like where I'm gonna start, and like I'll usually kind of pick out like some tracks that I know that I want at the beginning of the set, but it also totally depends, like, at what time of night I'm playing. Like if I'm, going after someone, I have no idea what they're gonna end their set with. So you can only prepare like to a certain extent. But I usually will have some tracks that like things I just downloaded that I know that I want to play at some point. Yeah.
So you almost have like some anchors or like tracks that you want.
Yeah, that's a good word.
Yeah. And then you just take it from there.
Yeah.
Do you feel comfortable in back-to-backs with people you never played with, or you tend to be a bit more on the fence because you don't know how to play?
Honestly, I usually hate back-to-backs. I I've had a couple really bad experiences, and where it just kind of feels like you're like fighting with the person that you're DJing with.
Yeah, I know the feeling.
Oh my God. Like actually there's one party where they booked me to play a back-to-back with a resident, which I felt was kind of strange because like I'd never met this resident before, and they wanted us to play a 4-hour back-to-back, and it kind of felt like we were like, it was like a tug of war a little bit. Like I kept on trying to bring in like some new rhythms and textures, and then he kept on going back to like this just like techno, and it didn't really work. But recently I did play a back-to-back with two good friends of mine,
Irene.
and Rekka. And it was Irene's idea, and at first I was like, oh my God, no. And then we decided to just like try it out at my apartment and just like do a test run, and we had so much fun. And so we played on HoR and it was so much fun. Like I haven't had that much fun DJing in probably like years, because I think like I tend to get like super like I'm really self-critical, and I get like really like I just put a lot of pressure on myself, like for a DJ set to be perfect, you know. And when I was playing with them, it was like there was so much that was out of my control, and it was just like really nice to not care like in the way that I usually would. And so I think like the three of us will probably play again together. I mean, we've been talking about it. So yeah, in response to your question, it definitely like depends on the person. Yeah.
That's really great to hear. And Irene Amnes, for people who don't know, it's a mutual friend of both of us, and I had the pleasure to play many back-to-backs.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I when I asked you the question, I was actually thinking about her because we played an incredibly long set. I mean, it must have been like 3 years ago, like 7 hours, almost 6 hours, and
wow.
And I was sick as fuck. But Irene is a person that I would love, and I love to play back-to-backs with because I think we fit well with each other. Like there's something like kind of works. It doesn't feel we are, as you were saying, we're not fighting to step on each other or to be better than the other person. We're like, okay, we're having fun. And I guess it's the same for you. Like, you know, when you build on each other, it feels like you're kind of bouncing each other something. It's more like you're collaborating. It's not like playing against one another.
Exactly. Yeah, it was really nice. And there were even like some points where in the set that we played on HoR, like there was a song that she played that had like a really weird breakdown, and like she was like, I don't think you're going to be able to mix out of this. And so she told me, she was like, loop it now. And like obviously you can't hear it on the video, but I felt like we were like helping each other out in this way. That was really nice. So
wow, yeah. Looping now is like a bomb is about to explode. Like, yo, get out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like fun. I'm gonna try to find the Easter egg in your set in HoR. All right, very nice. I think we're gonna start wrapping up. We've been together already for almost 1 hour, so I'm gonna ask anybody who's listening and wants to ask questions, any questions for Chloe that you might have, post them in Facebook in the comments, and we're gonna filter and ask them to Chloe. In the meantime, let me ask you one thing. What is one thing that you would change in the music industry? And it can be pre-COVID or now, after COVID.
I think kind of like, you know, similarly to what I was saying with journalism, like I would love to see some different and more diverse voices contributing to the scene. And I know there's been like some awareness of this in the last few months, but like I would love to see some new parties in Berlin and like new styles and new contributors. And I think the paradox is that post-COVID, it's going to be a lot of the bigger names who are going to be booked, and like a lot of the bigger clubs who have survived the pandemic who are like going to be kind of curating what's happening in the scene. So I think like there's a way to like collectively shift the territory, so it's not just like a strengthening of or like a perpetuation of the status quo as it has been. I mean, I would love to see that.
Yeah, pretty hard. I mean, there's a lot of people who are thinking that this is gonna promote like return to the grassroots and to the local scenes, because it's harder for people to fly. It's more expensive. Clubs can't afford to pay the big fees, so that will create some kind of reset and hopefully some room for local DJs or unknown DJs or underground DJs. I hope, I wish for that. I'm, I don't know, concerned about what you just said. That is, probably the big DJs and their agents already have been paid before pandemic, and they have and clubs have a backlog of bookings for a while.
Yeah.
So
No, but I think you could be right though. I think like, you know, there could be like a silver lining to this where there is more like grassroots collectivism, which would be really awesome.
yeah, or perhaps like new parties, like completely new
Yeah.
parties that are popping up and creating more space for up and coming DJs or artists.
Yeah, definitely.
For example, like horror, I think they've done a great job like of creating a bit of diversity also in the scene, like booking from the biggest names to the ones that have played 2 or 3 times. Amazing.
Yeah, no, they've done a really good job. I've been super impressed with it. Because it all just kind of like took off in the last year. And
yeah,
no, they've done a good job.
they kept us company during the hard times of the pandemic.
Yeah.
All right. And there is let me ask you a question from the audience. What do you think about the Georgian scene, in particular Tbilisi, if you've been there or you know the scene?
Yeah, I've actually spent a lot of time there. I wrote a story there in 2018, and then I actually got a grant to do a story there this past year. So I was there for a month in October. I love Tbilisi, and there was a moment when I was visiting that I was considering just like staying.
Why not?
I mean, it's really cheap. It's beautiful. The people are super, super, super nice and welcoming. Yeah, I mean, music-wise, I think that like Bassiani is amazing. I haven't really spent time at Haiti, but I've been like very impressed by the lineups that they've curated from afar. And I would like to play there at some point. Yeah, no, I think it's definitely like kind of set the tone also like in Eastern Europe and like Eurasia. Like it seems like a lot of people are like following Tbilisi's example, and yeah, I really like it there.
Yeah. The question was from Alex. Alex, thanks for the question. I fully agree with what you said. Like it's I've been lucky to have been there in Tbilisi. It's fucking amazing. Like people are the most amazing thing. Like so welcoming, so warm. Like it's beautiful. It's a pleasure to be there.
Yeah.
For parties or also for food. Yeah. Let's not start. I'm getting hungry. I would eat like Tbilisian food for all day. Like it's actually if you know any Tbilisian restaurant in Berlin, let me know, because it's I wanna.
There's a restaurant. Shoot, I forget what it's called, but it's by Schlesisches Tor. There's a Georgian restaurant. I could look up the name and let you know, but it is really good, and I've been there a few times.
Yeah, please.
Yes.
Wow. Yeah. Hopefully we'll also be able to go to restaurants like in person at some point.
Yeah, I know.
I'm missing the Berlin vibe of sitting outside, having food. Yeah. Kreuzberg.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, it's gonna come. One more question from the audience. Georgia is asking any future release plans.
So I mean, my next project, I'm scoring this 90-minute long, it's like an experimental film thing that's going to be done probably by the middle of April. And then I'm also contributing to a compilation on instruments of discipline. That's going to be more like experimental. In terms of like, oh, and actually I do have a release coming out with Irene Amnes and I are doing a split EP on Sierra Black's label, Pendulum. And I don't know the exact date when that's going to come out, but probably in the next few months. And beyond that, I don't have anything confirmed.
No, pretty cool. I mean, it seems you already have like few things, especially the score. Like, are you already working on that, on the full thing?
Yeah. We started talking about it a couple of months ago, and I actually was just in the studio with him yesterday, just like going over some ideas. And like, I've never scored anything before, and I've always wanted to. And it's cool. It's definitely like very challenging though. And it's like I have to think about it in a really different way than I would think about a track, because it's like so long, and it has to like take time to evolve, and like I also have to like think about like the visuals that are going to be happening like at any given moment, and like how the music can like support that, or like like direct the mood. So it's been cool, but it's like very difficult.
Yeah, it's definitely a new challenge. Like, it's a new territory. It's very yeah. Good luck with that. I'm looking forward to actually seeing or hearing the work.
Yeah, cool. I will share it. Yeah.
Nice. I think there is one more question. I think from Luca. He's asking, one of the favorite gigs you played in the last broadband that year, I guess, like 12 months.
Oh man. Trying to like even remember.
It feels so long ago. It feels like lives.
Well, the last gig that I played before the pandemic was it was at Bossa Nova in New York. Yeah, it was for my friend Andy's party, Syntheside, and it was really fun. It definitely has like kind of a grungy vibe. It was like super packed. Yeah, it was really, really fun. I'm getting really nostalgic thinking about it.
Yeah, I can imagine. Like, it's when was that?
That was
when was it?
Last January.
So yeah, over a year ago.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Guys of Bossa Nova, book Chloe again soon as you reopen. You need to do part 2.
Yeah.
All right, and thank you for the answers. Let me see if there is more. I'm gonna let me ask you actually the Home of Sound final questions.
Okay.
So, if you had $1,000 to donate to a charity, what charity or cause would you pick, and why?
So I actually did just do the birthday Facebook fundraiser thing. And I did it for the Audre Lorde project. And if I had more money, I would give it to them. And they're a nonprofit in New York, and they support LGBTQ people of color. But they specifically put their money towards organizing like radical nonviolent activism, and like prison reform, and like pro-immigrant, and like AIDS and HIV activism. So like a lot of progressive political initiatives that really resonate with me, and that I would like to get more involved in.
That's really cool. What's the name again? I didn't quite catch it.
It's called
the name of the charity.
Audre Lorde, AUDRE, Lorde, LORDE. Yeah.
Audre Lorde, and I will make sure to put it in the show notes. So if people are interested, they can see that too.
Okay.
Interesting. Okay, and another question: who is a guest you think we should really speak with, and why?
So I would love it if you talk to Oliver Ho, because he's like maybe you have talked to him. I don't think that you have though. But he's
No.
okay. Yeah, I mean, he's like my I don't know, he's still like a huge influence on me, like musically and aesthetically. I think he's also a visual artist, and like we definitely share a lot of musical sensibilities. Like he's really into metal, and like uh I don't know, he's just awesome. And I would love to hear more about his work and his creative process, because I've actually never had a chance to talk to him before, even though we've shared lineups. So that would be my vote.
Very cool. Yeah. So Oliver Hall. And I know, I don't know him personally. I know of him because of Chaos in London. I don't know if you know the party, but they have had Oliver a bunch of times. And I also remember, I believe, one of his live sets at Tonal 2 or 3 years ago when he was playing live. It was one of the best and most inspiring live sets I've ever seen. Really cool artist.
He's incredible. Yeah.
Oliver, thank you. And right, one question you would like us to ask the next guest without knowing who they're going to be?
Well, I mean, I'm really interested in people's lives beyond what we see in the public sphere, like what we see on social media. So I'd be interested in knowing what non-musical interest or hobby of theirs they've been cultivating that most people don't know about.
Wow, okay. Interesting question. I'm gonna oblige them to be honest. And as you might imagine, there is a question for you. Yes. Okay. So this is from the previous guest, and it is, how do you think each artist can help rebuild and restart the music scene after the pandemic?
That's a good question. I think I mean, I think that like just being really invested in like interdependence and like you know, like helping people. I think like the vibe that I got was like there was a lot of I don't know, like there's like things were like a little bit competitive, at least in like the little sub scene that I was in, and like I felt like I didn't know other people in my scene very well either. And I think just kind of like making yourself available to like, you know, help other people and like help get their projects off the ground. I think this is like the time when that's going to be super, super important.
Yeah. Try to act as a community instead of enemies.
Yeah, exactly.
It sounds cliche, but I think it's super important and super true. Like to support each other.
Yeah.
Great. Chloe, thank you so much for being with us. This has been very interesting. Very nice to meet you as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was really nice chatting.
It was very nice to chat, and hopefully we will meet on the dance floor at some point very soon.
Yes, I hope so.
Yeah, long-awaited moment. And guys, for who are watching or listening, thank you for being with us. And until next time. Hello, this is Joseph again. If you made it this far into the podcast, we would love to hear your feedback, and you can leave any comments anonymously or with your name, and also suggest whom we should interview next via the link bit.ly/HOS_feedback. Basically, bit.ly HoS_feedback. If you're a creator or work in music, you can also check our website www.homeofsound.co.uk for on-demand masterclasses with creators such as Ansom, Scarameria, François X, Swarm Intelligence, Freddie K, Face Fatal, Vijay Martinovna, Malika Maria, Lag, VSK, Romek, Manny D, Arjun Bagale, and many, many more. And again, thank you for listening, engaging, and being with us home. Until next time.